Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again with your late night creature feature. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's see what tonight's tale brings us. The Seventh Gate. Chapter 1. The Puzzles Were Kind. Miriam Hale. Look, Jerusalem doesn't feel ancient when you first arrive. It feels like traffic. The taxi dropped us near the old city just after noon, the heat pressing down like something physical, vendors shouting over each other. The tour groups drifted past in matching hats. Someone laughed. Someone else was already arguing about the fare. Daniel stood there grinning like we'd won something. 10 years. His voice carried that breathless wonder I'd fallen in love with. 10 years of dead-end footnotes and we're actually here. I adjusted my bag, already scanning the crowd out of habit. The old instincts don't shut off just because you're excited. We're near it. Let's not celebrate yet. He kissed my cheek anyway, quick and careless, like the city couldn't possibly mind. We'd been careful. That mattered to us more than the discovery itself, if I'm being honest. We had every permit legitimate. We had every archive visit documented. No midnight break-ins. No stolen tablets. No Indiana Jones bullshit. Just the puzzles, the paper trails, the marginal notes that didn't want to be noticed. To us, this was the kind of work that rewards patience and punishes shortcuts. The first real clue came from a dead language footnote buried in a translation nobody reads anymore. A scribal correction that wasn't actually correcting anything, just redirecting. A spatial reference disguised as theology. Daniel saw the structure immediately. The load paths. The weight distribution. He's an architect by training. The ancient buildings always tell on themselves if you know what questions to ask. I followed the language. What wasn't said. What got repeated only when no one was paying attention. Together, we built a map that didn't exist on paper. It existed in the negative space. The Seventh Gate. That's what the oldest texts called it. Not a doorway, not a passage, a point of separation. The final seal in a sequence of 7, each one bearing a specific weight, each one holding something back. The 6 gates had been documented over the centuries, theological references, architectural mysteries, the spaces that existed in overlap between history and scripture. The 7th was always missing. Not destroyed, not lost. Just never mentioned directly. Like no one wanted to name it out loud. Daniel had this theory that the 7 gates weren't metaphorical, they were structural. Architecture embedded in theology, holding something in place through sheer distributed weight. It's like a dam, he'd explained once, sketching on a napkin at 2 in the morning. You don't need one massive wall. You need 7 smaller barriers, each one redirecting pressure to the next. Remove one and the system compensates. Remove the 7th. He trailed off. I'd finished his thought. The whole thing notices. He'd looked at me like I'd just solved the equation he'd been stuck on for months. We got married 3 weeks later. Not because of the research, because of moments like that, when the work and the life blurred together and neither of us could tell where one ended and the other began. By the 3rd day in Jerusalem, we weren't arguing anymore. That's how I knew we were close. The arguments mean uncertainty. The silence means alignment. We followed the tourist routes openly, cameras around our necks like everyone else, ducked into the shaded courtyards and passages so narrow our shoulders brushed the stone worn smooth by centuries of hands. The city felt layered, compressed, like every era was still here, just pressed tighter together than physics should allow. Daniel kept pacing things off, counting under his breath. His fingers twitched when the numbers lined up right. Mine did the same when the words repeated where they shouldn't. We found the phrase 4 times that afternoon. Never translated, never explained. Just written and rewritten across different centuries in different hands. Do not lift what bears the city's weight. Metaphorical. Daniel's tone meant he didn't believe it. Or literal. Mine meant I did. He grinned at me like I was being charming. I let him. We stopped for coffee at a place that charged too much and didn't care. Daniel ordered in broken Hebrew. The guy behind the counter answered in perfect English and charged us the tourist rate anyway. 12 shekels for coffee. Daniel shook his head. Highway robbery. You're the one who wanted the authentic experience. I wanted authentic coffee, not authentic price gouging. I laughed. It felt good, normal, like we were just 2 people on vacation instead of 2 people about to make the worst mistake of our lives. We sat outside under an awning, watching the crowds flow past. Families, pilgrims, soldiers with rifles slung casual over their shoulders like purses. Daniel pulled out his notebook, flipping through pages dense with his cramped handwriting and my neater annotations in the margins. The access point should be near the maintenance corridor, city infrastructure, old plumbing routes layered under newer fixes. A place no tourist would want to linger, I added, and no one with a reason to rush would question. We'd gotten good at this, finding the spaces between official and forgotten, the places that existed because no one had bothered to remove them yet. The guard at the maintenance entrance barely glanced at our papers. Researchers? Daniel switched to English this time. The guard looked us over, young, bored, probably pulled the short straw for afternoon shifts. 30 minutes. Stay in the marked areas. I smiled. Absolutely. We lasted about 5 minutes before we stopped staying in the marked areas. The air changed underground, cooler, damp, the stone that hadn't seen sunlight since before calendars agreed on how time worked. Daniel crouched near a wall, running his hand over the surface like it might have a pulse. This section shouldn't be load-bearing. His voice dropped to a murmur. But it is. That's when I felt it for the first time. Not fear. Pressure. Like standing too close to something tall and realizing you'd have to crane your neck forever to see the top. The corridor branched. We took the left fork because Daniel's measurement said so. The passage narrowed. The ceiling dropped. My shoulders brushed stone on both sides. You okay? Daniel glanced back. Fine, I lied. I don't like tight spaces. Never have. Something about the weight pressing down, the lack of options, the way your breath starts to feel borrowed instead of owned. But I followed him anyway. Because that's what we did. We followed the puzzles to the end. The final sequence wasn't clever. It was polite. A series of spaces that only lined up if you didn't force them. A doorway that appeared when you stopped trying to find it directly. I hate admitting that. It felt intentional, like the city was meeting us halfway. Daniel found the seam in the wall, not hidden, just patient. I found the warning carved so lightly into the stone it disappeared unless the light hit it wrong. Not words this time, just an absence shaped like restraint. You ready? Daniel's hand hovered near the seam. I should have said no. I should have grabbed his hand and pulled him back up to the surface where the sun was still shining and people were still arguing about taxi fares. Instead, I nodded. The chamber was small, unimpressive, no gold, no murals, no drama. Just a single object set into a shallow recess like it had been returned there many times before. Palm-sized, stone, and some kind of alloy that didn't look like any metal I recognized, warm to the touch despite the cool air. Daniel exhaled, the sound caught between relief and disbelief. That's it? 10 years for this? I pulled out my phone to take photos. The camera struggled. The images came out overexposed, blurred, like the lens didn't know where to focus. I tried again. Same result. Daniel, My voice came out barely above a whisper. He was already reaching for it. I didn't stop him. That's on me. That will always be on me. The moment he lifted it, I felt lighter. Not relieved, not freed, unnoticed. Like stepping out of someone's line of sight and realizing you'd been watched longer than you thought. Nothing shook, nothing exploded, no alarm sounding, no voices from the dark warning us we'd made a terrible mistake. Just the silence settling deeper than before. Daniel turned the object over in his hands, fascinated. The engravings on the surface weren't really engravings, more like depressions that formed shapes only when the light slid across them a certain way. "It's a key. Or a lock," I replied. He looked at me, smile fading slightly. "What's the difference?" I didn't have an answer for that. Above us, the city continued. Footsteps, voices, life doing what it does. Everything exactly as it should be. I remember thinking we'd been careful enough. I remember thinking the warnings were just warnings. I remember Daniel slipping the object into his pack and the weight of it settling against his back like it belonged there. We climbed back up through the maintenance corridor, past the guard who didn't look up from his phone, into the late afternoon heat where the sun was still bright and the vendors were still shouting and nothing had changed. Except everything had. We just didn't know it yet. Chapter 2, The City Leans In. Daniel Hale. We came up out of the maintenance corridor like we were surfacing from a pool. Same sun, same noise, same crowds. And still, something had shifted. Not in the city. In me. The relic sat in my pack like a stone I couldn't stop thinking about. Not because it was heavy, because it felt present. Like an idea that keeps clearing its throat until you acknowledge it. Miriam walked half a step ahead, scanning faces and corners the way she always did when she didn't want to admit she was tense. "You didn't log the removal." Her tone was flat. "Careful. We'll do it back at the hotel. I just want to get it somewhere secure first." She stopped and looked at me. That's the thing about being married to someone smarter than you. They don't say you're lying. They just wait for you to catch up to yourself. "Daniel. Just my name. Nothing else needed." "I know," I snapped, then immediately regretted it. "I know. It's just, we finally found it." It sounded childish even to me. We kept walking. The first sign wasn't supernatural. It was ordinary, too ordinary. A group of tourists near a kiosk laughed, then stopped laughing all at once. Like someone had cut the sound. Their mouths kept moving for a beat. Their faces were still smiling. Then the laughter resumed, slightly out of sync with the expressions. I blamed my own fatigue, the jet lag, the heat, the weird acoustics of the old city streets. The sound bounces here off the stone, off the history, off every tight corridor and vaulted ceiling. But it happened again 10 minutes later. A man argued with a vendor, gesturing hard, voice rising. Then a half-second delay where his mouth moved and the words arrived late, like a poorly dubbed film. Miriam noticed it too. I saw it in her eyes, the way her posture tightened. "You hearing that?" "Echo," I said too quickly. But there was no echo, just the wrong timing. We cut through a narrow passageway where the shade pooled between buildings. A cat watched us from a ledge, motionless as a statue. Then a bird called somewhere overhead. One bird. That should have been normal. What struck me was everything else missing. No chorus, no background chatter of wings and calls and life. Just a single sound, lonely and thin. Miriam slowed. "Where are the birds?" she murmured. "They're here." The words came too fast. "It's just cities. They move around." She didn't answer. And when I looked up, I realized I hadn't seen a single bird in the sky since we'd come back up. Not one. Back at the hotel, we did what we always do when something unsettles us. We tried to turn it into work. Miriam laid out our notes and started cross-referencing our trail, trying to ground us in the paper and the logic. I pulled the relic from my pack and set it on the desk. In the air-conditioned room, it looked even more unimpressive. Stone and alloy, palm-sized, the matte surface with engravings that weren't engravings, more like depressions that formed shapes only when the light slid across them. Miriam lifted her phone again. The camera struggled. The image warped. The relic looked stretched, like it didn't want to be a single object in a single frame. She lowered the phone slowly. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "Feel what?" She hesitated, like she didn't want to give language to it. "Like the room is listening." I almost laughed, not because it was ridiculous, because it was too close to what I'd been trying not to admit. I reached out and touched the relic. Cold now. Not just cool. Cold like it had pulled the air temperature down around it. "Stone does that," I offered. Miriam's eye stayed locked on it. "Stone doesn't do that." That night, the city sounded different. From our window, Jerusalem spread out in the warm lights and the dark pockets. The cars moved like insects. The human noise rose and fell, life doing what it does. But the pauses were longer. The quiet between noises wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Miriam stood beside me, arms folded. "You ever get the sense," she said, voice low, "that we're not supposed to be here? We're supposed to be here." I meant it. We followed every rule. We did this right. She looked at me like she wanted to believe that. Then she said, "That's not what I mean. We didn't sleep well. I dreamed of weight. Not the pressure on my chest, the weight in the ground, like the city was sitting on something huge and patient. I woke before dawn with the sweat on my neck. The relic was on the desk where we left it. Except it wasn't. It had rotated slightly, as if someone had turned it to face the window. I stared at it, the heart hammering, telling myself it was nothing. The vibration from traffic, a shifting surface, my own memory misfiring. Miriam sat up in bed. "You awake?" "Yeah." She looked past me toward the desk. Her face changed. "You moved it." "No," I replied. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then, outside, the call to prayer began. Only it didn't. The first notes started, and then the sound dragged, stretched like tape, pulled too fast, then too slow, then corrected. The voice was there and not there, and for a second, I couldn't tell if it was coming from outside the window or inside my skull. Miriam covered her ears. I did too, without thinking. And when it ended, the city fell silent so completely it felt staged. Then, like someone remembered the world was supposed to be noisy, everything resumed at once. The cars, the voices, a distant door slam. Normal. But it wasn't normal. It was performed. By mid-morning, Miriam insisted we go back out. "If we stay in here," she reasoned, "we'll spiral." She was right. I grabbed the relic and tucked it deeper in my pack, like hiding it from my own thoughts. We headed toward the old city again, into the flow of tourists and locals. Miriam kept her sunglasses on even when we stepped into the shade. I noticed people pausing in strange places, not stopping to admire something, not checking their phones. Just stopping. A man near a stone archway stood perfectly still, the eyes wide, the mouth slightly open, like he was listening to a sound no one else could hear. A child in a stroller began to cry, then stopped abruptly, the face blank, like someone had turned the emotion off. Miriam whispered, "Look at their shadows." I didn't want to. I looked anyway. The shadows were wrong. Not in shape, in timing. A woman stepped forward. Her shadow hesitated for a fraction of a second, then followed. A man turned his head. His shadow turned after. the tiny delays. Barely anything. Enough to make my stomach drop. We passed a tour group clustered around a guide near the Jaffa Gate. Young guy, American accent, holding a little flag on a stick so his group could follow him. And this area dates back to the 16th century, rebuilt by Suleiman the Magnificent after... He stopped mid-sentence. Not because he'd lost his train of thought. Because his mouth kept moving but no sound came out for a full 2 seconds. Then the words caught up, garbled and overlapping. The Ottomans controlled the region, and... The tour group shifted uncomfortably. A few people glanced at each other. The guide cleared his throat, smiled too wide. Sorry folks, long day. Where was I? But his eyes were wrong, glassy, like he was looking at something just past all of them. Miriam pulled me away. Did you see his face? She whispered. Yeah. Daniel, what's happening? I didn't have an answer. We kept walking, faster now, like speed could outrun whatever wrongness was settling over the city. We drifted closer to the western wall because the crowds feel safer when you're unsettled. That's basic human instinct. If something is wrong, you want the witnesses. You want the noise. You want the world to insist it's still the world. The plaza was busy, the praying, the touring, the photographing, the crying, the laughing. Life. And yet the air felt thick, like humidity without moisture. Miriam's voice was tight. Daniel, do you smell that? I inhaled. At first, nothing. Then something faint and metallic, like old coins rubbed together, like blood dried on stone long ago. I shifted my pack on my shoulder. The strap creaked. The sound seemed to carry too far, like the air wanted it. A woman near us stumbled, catching herself on a railing. Her companion reached for her, concerned. Are you okay? The woman blinked slowly, like waking from a dream. Yes, She trailed off, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Her companion laughed nervously. Too much walking. Let's get you some water. But the woman didn't move. She kept staring at her hands, turning them over, the fingers trembling. They feel heavy, she whispered. Then her nose started bleeding. Not a lot, just a thin line of red that traced down to her lip. She touched it, looked at her fingers, and her eyes went wide. I didn't. Her companion pulled her away quickly, worried now, guiding her toward the edge of the plaza. Miriam grabbed my wrist hard. We need to leave. Where? I spread my hands. Where would we go? She didn't have an answer for that either. Then we heard it. Not from the wall. From above. A low, distant rumble like thunder. But the sky was clear. I looked up. So did Miriam. So did half the plaza. And for a second, everyone held the same breath. Nothing moved. No clouds. No planes, just the blue sky, bright and indifferent. Then the rumble came again deeper this time and the light seemed to flicker, not like a shadow passing, but like the sun itself hesitated. People murmured, confused, concerned. A man near the wall stopped praying and looked up, the phylactery still wrapped around his arm. What was that? Someone called out in Hebrew. Thunder, someone else replied in English. But we all knew it wasn't thunder. Because thunder doesn't make the ground hum. Thunder doesn't make the air taste like copper. Miriam pulled me toward a side street, away from the plaza, away from the crowds. We need to find someone who knows the history here, the real history. Like who? I don't know. A rabbi, a scholar, someone who might have heard of the seventh gate. We asked 3 people before we found someone willing to talk to us. An old man sitting outside a small bookshop, the kind of place tourists walk past without noticing. He was reading from a heavy tome, the pages yellowed and brittle. Miriam approached him carefully. "Excuse me," she kept her voice gentle. "We're researchers. We're trying to learn about some of the older traditions here, specifically about gates." The man looked up slowly. His eyes were sharp despite his age. "Gates," he repeated. "7 of them," I added. "Structural, theological, we think we might have." "Found something you shouldn't have," the old man finished my sentence. The silence stretched. He closed his book gently and set it aside. "Sit." We sat. He studied us for a long moment, then sighed like he'd seen this before and knew how it ended. "The 7 gates are not metaphor." His voice dropped low. "They are restraint, each one placed by those who understood that some things must be unacknowledged." "Unacknowledged," Miriam leaned forward. "Not forgotten, not destroyed, unacknowledged." He leaned forward. "There are things in this world, old things, patient things that exist only when noticed. The gates were designed to bear weight, not physical weight, the weight of attention." My mouth went dry. What happens if one is removed? I already knew the answer. The old man's expression was sad, pitying. Then the city becomes visible, and what watches from above finally looks down. Miriam's hand found mine under the table. Her fingers were ice cold. "How do we fix it? How do we put it back?" The old man shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. The gates don't keep things out. They keep us unnoticed. You've removed the 7th, the final restraint, the one that bore the most weight because it was the last barrier between being overlooked and being seen." "Seen by what?" He looked up at the sky like he could see through the buildings, through the atmosphere, through everything. "By what has always been there, waiting for permission to look." He stood, joints creaking, and went inside his shop without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click. We sat there in the silence, the street suddenly feeling too exposed. Miriam touched my arm. "Daniel, your nose." I touched my upper lip. "Blood." "Not a lot, just a thin trickle. Like the woman at the wall." I wiped it away quickly, but my hand was shaking. "We need to get underground." My voice came out steady despite everything. "Back to the chamber. We put it back. He said we can't," Miriam interrupted. "He's one old man with a book. He doesn't know." "Daniel." Her voice was sharp, final. "He knows more than we do." I wanted to argue. I wanted to insist we could fix this, that being careful and methodical and following the rules would somehow make this okay. But the blood on my fingers said otherwise. We started walking. No destination, just movement. Like staying still would make us easier to notice. The streets felt wrong now. Not dangerous, wrong. Like someone had replaced Jerusalem with a replica that was 99% accurate but missing something essential. We passed a cafe where people sat drinking coffee, but no one was talking. They just sat there, the cups raised to their lips, faces blank, staring at nothing. One woman's hand trembled so badly the coffee sloshed over the rim, burning her fingers. She didn't react, just kept holding the cup, the coffee dripping onto the table. "Jesus Christ," Miriam whispered. We kept walking. A few blocks later, we heard shouting. Angry voices in Hebrew, then English, then something that might have been Arabic. A crowd had gathered near a narrow intersection. People were arguing, shoving, voices rising. We got close enough to hear what they were saying. "Not my fault. You walked into me. Wasn't even near you. Swear to God you touched me." But here's the thing. No one was near anyone else. They were all standing at least 6 feet apart, shouting at empty space, accusing people who weren't there of things that hadn't happened. A man lunged forward, fists raised, swinging at nothing. His knuckles connected with air and he stumbled, confused, like he'd expected to hit something solid. How did you? A woman screamed and pointed at the ground. My shadow, she shrieked. Someone standing on my shadow. There was no one there. But her shadow was wrong. It stretched too far in the wrong direction, bending around a corner where no light source existed. Miriam pulled me away before I could say anything. "Don't," she hissed. "Don't engage. We need to get back to the hotel." We moved faster now, almost running, weaving through the streets. Behind us, the shouting escalated into something worse. The sound of breaking glass. A scream that cut off too suddenly. Then silence. That terrible, staged silence. We made it back to the hotel just as the sun began to set. The lobby was empty. Not closed, just empty. The clerk who should have been at the desk wasn't there. The tourists who'd been milling around that morning were gone. The elevator took forever to arrive, and when it did, the doors opened on an empty car that smelled faintly of copper. We rode up in silence, the numbers counting slowly like they were reluctant to reach our floor. In our room, I locked the door. Miriam closed the curtains. We stood there, breathing hard, trying to process what we'd seen. "This is happening everywhere." Miriam's voice shook. "Isn't it? Not just the old city, the whole city." I nodded. She sat on the bed, head in her hands. "How many people?" she whispered. "How many people are going to die because we—" "Stop!" I cut her off. "We didn't know. We should have known." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "The warnings were there, Daniel. We saw them. We read them. We just didn't listen because we wanted to be the ones who figured it out." I had no answer for that. Because she was right. We'd been so focused on solving the puzzle that we'd never stopped to ask why it was a puzzle in the first place. Why it had remained hidden for so long. Why no one else had found it. The warnings weren't vague. They were explicit. Do not lift what bears the city's weight. We'd just chosen to interpret them as metaphor. I sat beside her and pulled the relic from my pack. It was warm again, almost hot. The engravings on its surface seemed to move in the low light, the depressions forming patterns that looked almost like eyes. "What are you?" I whispered to it. It didn't answer. But somewhere outside, the rumble returned. Louder this time. Longer. And this time, the ground shook. Not an earthquake, too controlled, too deliberate, like something massive had just shifted its weight. Miriam stood and pulled back the curtain slightly, peering out at the city. "Daniel," her voice was barely above a whisper. "Look." I joined her at the window. The sky was darkening, but not with night. With something else. A thin, pale line had appeared above the old city, running horizontal across the sky like a crack in glass. As we watched, it widened. Slowly, deliberately, like something on the other side was prying it open. And beneath it, the lights of Jerusalem flickered. Not out. Just hesitant. Like the city was holding its breath. "It's starting," Miriam whispered. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to believe we still had time. But deep down, I knew. The seventh gate was open, and whatever had been waiting patiently for millennia to be noticed was finally looking down. Chapter 3, the first to fall. Miriam Hale. The screaming started just after sunset. Not all at once, in waves, like the wrongness was spreading outward from a central point, touching people in sequence. We heard it from our hotel room, distant at first, then closer, then right outside our window. A woman's voice, high and terrified. "Something's wrong with the sky. Can't you see it? Can't anyone see it?" Then a man's voice, trying to calm her. "There's nothing there. You're okay. You're—" He stopped mid-sentence. A long pause. Then his voice came again, different now, hollow. "Oh God, oh God, I see it." Daniel moved toward the window, but I grabbed his arm. Don't look out there. We need to know what's happening. We know what's happening. Looking won't help." But he looked anyway, and I looked with him because I couldn't help myself. The street below was chaos. People running, people standing frozen, people screaming at nothing and everything. A car swerved, mounted the curb, crashed into a storefront. The driver stumbled out, hands pressed to his ears, mouth open in a silent scream. The crack in the sky had widened further. It wasn't dark inside. It was layered, like looking at the sky through the sky, seeing depth where there should only be flat blue. And shapes were moving in that depth. Slow, deliberate movements. Things folding and unfolding. Daniel's hand tightened on my shoulder. "We need to leave the city, get to the airport, get out of the country. The whole world is under that sky," I replied. "Where would we go?" He didn't have an answer. Below us, a tour bus screeched to a halt in the middle of the street. The door hissed open and people poured out, panicked, shoving. The young tour guide from earlier, the one we'd seen at Jaffa Gate, stumbled out last, the little flag still clutched in his hand. He looked up at the sky. His mouth opened, and he started screaming. Not words, just sound, raw and animal and wrong. The other tourists backed away from him, but he kept screaming, the sound going on and on until it shouldn't have been physically possible. Then his nose started bleeding, thick and fast, pouring down his face. His eyes watered red, not tears, blood. He dropped to his knees, still screaming, hands clawing at his ears. "Daniel," I whispered, "we need to—" The tour guide's screaming stopped abruptly. He knelt there in the street, swaying, head tilted back at an unnatural angle. Then his back arched. The crack was wet and loud even from our window. His shirt tore down the spine as something beneath the skin pushed outward. The tourists scattered, running, but I couldn't look away. The guide's skin split. Not violently, almost gently, like it was being opened from the inside with careful precision. Blood poured down his back as the skin peeled away in two neat flaps. And beneath, bone, white and sharp and growing. The bones pushed out further, branching, splitting, forming shapes that didn't belong to any anatomy I'd ever studied. The guide fell forward onto his hands, body convulsing. The bones kept growing, extending from his back in long, jointed segments. Wings. They were forming wings. The membrane stretched between the bone segments, translucent and veined, glistening wet in the streetlights. The guide, what was left of him, raised his head. His face was still human, still recognizably the same young man who'd been cheerfully explaining Ottoman history hours ago, but his eyes were empty. Not dead, empty, like someone had scooped out everything that made him a person and left only the meat behind. He stood slowly, the new wings dragging on the pavement, leaving smears of blood and fluid. Then he tested them. One flexed, then the other. The movement was wrong, too fluid, too controlled for something brand new. He'd never had wings before, but something else knew how to use them. Daniel made a sound beside me, halfway between a sob and a laugh. "He's still alive." Daniel's voice cracked. "He's still alive in there." Because the tour guide's mouth was moving, forming words we couldn't hear from this distance. "Help me." Or maybe, "It hurts." Or maybe, "Kill me." Then his wings spread fully 10 feet, 12, impossible, and he lifted off the ground. not gracefully. He rose jerkily, like he was being pulled by invisible strings. The tourists who were still watching screamed and ran. The guide rose higher, wings beating now with more confidence, and then he was gone, disappearing into the crack in the sky, into the depth, into whatever was waiting there. Daniel stumbled backward from the window and threw up in the trash can. I just stood there, shaking, unable to move, because I'd seen his face before the wings took him, the guide's face. And it wasn't horror. It was relief, like he'd finally understood something terrible and true, and he'd welcomed it. Chapter 4, The Horns. Daniel Hale. The sirens started around 9 p.m. Police, ambulances, fire trucks, every emergency vehicle in the city screaming through the streets all at once, trying to respond to everything and nothing. They stopped an hour later, not because the emergencies ended, because there were too many. Miriam and I huddled in the hotel room, listening to the world fall apart outside. We turned off the lights, closed the curtains, like darkness could hide us from whatever was looking down. The television still worked, but the channels were chaos. News anchors mid-sentence would stop and stare at the camera, mouths working silently, eyes unfocused. Then they'd resume talking like nothing happened, but the words came out wrong, garbled, overlapping with themselves. One anchor started crying on air, blood running from her nose, and the camera just kept rolling. No one cut away. No one helped her. She sat there weeping bloody tears until the feed cut to static. Miriam sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, the relic in her hands. "It's warm." Her voice was barely audible. "Getting warmer." I touched it. She was right. The stone and alloy surface was almost hot now, like it was drawing heat from somewhere. Maybe that means something. Maybe it's trying to... To what, Daniel? Close itself? It's an object. It doesn't want anything. Then why is it getting warmer? She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Despair. Complete, bottomless despair. "Because," she breathed, "we're being noticed too." The sound hit at exactly 11:43 p.m. I know because I was staring at the clock, watching the minutes tick by, praying each one would pass normally. Then the horns blew. Not from the street, not from any direction I could point to. From everywhere. From the air itself. A sound so deep and loud it wasn't just noise, it was pressure, physical and crushing, pressing down on the entire city at once. The windows rattled in their frames. The walls vibrated. My teeth ached from the frequency. Miriam screamed, but I couldn't hear her over the sound. I saw her mouth open, saw her hands clamp over her ears, but the horns drowned out everything. They blew for 10 seconds. It felt like 10 hours. When they stopped, the silence that followed was worse, because we could hear what the horns had done. The screaming started immediately. Thousands of voices, maybe tens of thousands, all crying out at once in pain and terror and madness. I stumbled to the window and pulled the curtain back. The street below was pandemonium. People poured out of buildings, hands pressed to their ears, blood streaming between their fingers. Some collapsed immediately, writhing on the pavement. Others ran in random directions, slamming into walls and cars and each other. A man near the hotel entrance fell to his knees, vomiting blood onto the sidewalk. His companion tried to help him up, but her own nose was bleeding so badly she couldn't see, couldn't function, just stood there swaying while red poured down her face and neck. The horns blew again. Longer this time. Deeper. The pressure doubled. I felt something warm on my upper lip and touched it. Blood. My ears were bleeding too. I could feel it running down the sides of my neck, warm and wrong. Beside me, Miriam was on her hands and knees, blood dripping from her nose onto the carpet. "Make it stop," she gasped. "Daniel, make it stop." But there was nothing I could do. The horns were coming from the sky itself, from the crack that had spread across Jerusalem like a wound, from whatever was on the other side, announcing itself. When the sound ended the second time, I heard sobbing. Everywhere, from every direction, adults and children and the elderly, all crying at once, their minds breaking under the weight of something they couldn't process. I helped Miriam to her feet. Her eyes were bloodshot, the whites streaked with red. She looked at me and I knew I looked the same. "We have to get out of this building." Her voice came out hoarse. "We have to." The horns blew a third time, and this time they didn't stop. The sound went on, rising and falling in waves, each wave hitting a different frequency that resonated in a different part of the body. My chest vibrated, my skull ached, my teeth felt like they were coming loose. Through the window, I watched people lose their minds. A woman in a business suit tore at her own face, fingernails raking deep gouges down her cheeks. Blood poured from the wounds, but she didn't stop, didn't even seem to notice, just kept clawing like she was trying to peel away the skin and find something underneath. A man slammed his head against a stone wall, over and over, the wet crack of bone audible even over the horns. His skull split open and he kept going, kept hitting the wall, until he finally collapsed in a heap. Not suicide, just broken. The horns had broken something in their minds, and their bodies were just following through. A teenage girl stood in the middle of the street, arms spread wide, face turned up to the sky. Blood ran from her ears and nose and eyes, but she was smiling, laughing, spinning in slow circles like she was dancing to music only she could hear. Then her back arched. I knew what was coming before it happened. "No," I whispered. "Not her too." Her shirt tore as something pushed from beneath. The skin split down her spine, neat and precise, and the white bones began to emerge. She screamed, but it wasn't pain. It was ecstasy. The wings grew fast, faster than they had with the tour guide. The bone segments extended and branched, the membrane stretching between them, and within seconds she had fully formed wings spreading 12 feet on either side. She fell forward onto her hands and knees, body convulsing, but the wings kept growing, kept adjusting, kept learning how to be. Then she stood, and her face was empty. The girl who'd been there seconds ago was gone. Something else was wearing her now. She tested the wings once, twice, then leapt into the air and was gone, rising toward the crack in the sky, toward whatever was calling. All over the street, it was happening. One person, then 3, then a dozen, their backs splitting, their wings emerging, their faces going blank as something else took residence. The horns kept blowing, and more people fell, clutching their heads, tearing at their skin, transforming. Miriam grabbed my arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "We have to go," she shouted over the noise. "Now, before we—" She stopped. Her hand went to her nose. More blood. But that wasn't what made her freeze. It was the look in her eyes, the sudden, terrible understanding. "Daniel," her voice dropped to a whisper. "I can hear them." "Hear what?" "The voices in the horns. They're speaking." "What are they saying?" Her face crumpled. "They're calling us," she sobbed. "They're calling us home." I pulled her toward the door, but she resisted, turning back toward the window like she was being summoned. "Miriam, we have to move." "But they're waiting." Her voice went dreamy and distant. "They've always been waiting. We just couldn't hear them before." I slapped her. Not hard, just enough to break whatever hold the sound had on her. Her eyes focused, and she looked at me with horror. "Oh God." Her voice shook. "Oh God, Daniel." It almost had me. We ran. Out of the room, down the hallway where other guests were emerging from their rooms in various states of distress. Blood everywhere. Screaming. Crying. One man walking calmly toward the stairwell despite the fact that his ears were bleeding so badly it looked like someone had shot him in the head. We took the stairs because the elevator felt like a trap. Down and down, passing other people, climbing up for reasons that made no sense. All of us just trying to move, to do something, anything other than stand still and let the horns break us. The lobby was a massacre. Not from violence. From transformation. At least 6 people were on the ground, writhing, backs splitting open, wings emerging in various stages of completion. Hotel staff tried to help and couldn't. There was nothing to do but watch as bone and membrane pushed through skin and their loved ones stopped being people. One of them, a young clerk I recognized from check-in, reached toward the front desk manager with a hand that was already changing, fingers elongating, joints bending in new directions. "Help." His voice was barely a whisper. "Please help." But the manager just backed away, horrified, and the clerk's hand fell to the ground as his transformation accelerated. We pushed through the front doors and into the street. The air outside was thick with blood and sound. The horns hadn't stopped. They were background now, a constant pressure that made thinking difficult and breathing painful. Bodies everywhere, some dead, some dying, some transforming. And above it all, the crack in the sky had opened wide enough that we could see through it now. See what was on the other side. Shapes. Massive, patient, folding and unfolding in space that shouldn't exist, waiting to descend. Miriam Hale. We ran toward the old city because every other direction felt wrong, like the wrongness was emanating outward from the western wall, and running away from it would just put us further from understanding. Or maybe we were already broken and just didn't know it yet. The streets were clogged with abandoned cars, bodies, people who'd stopped moving mid-stride and now stood frozen like statues, eyes turned upward, watching the sky open. The horns kept blowing. My ears had stopped bleeding, but everything sounded muffled now, like I was underwater. Daniel's voice came through, distorted when he shouted something at me, pointing toward an alley. We ducked into the narrow passage and the sound lessened slightly, the stone walls providing some buffer. Daniel leaned against the wall, breathing hard, the blood on his face dried and cracking. "The western wall." He gasped for air. "We need to get there. If this started because we removed the 7th gate, maybe what? Maybe we can put it back and everything will be fine? Daniel, look around. It's too late. We have to try." He was right. We had to try. Even if it was useless. Even if the city was already lost, we had to try. We kept moving, cutting through passages and courtyards, avoiding the main streets where the transformations were happening in clusters. I saw a mother holding her daughter, both of them crying, the mother's back already starting to split. She was trying to comfort the child even as her own body betrayed her, even as the bones pushed through and the wings began to form. "It's okay, baby." Her voice broke. "Mommy's okay. Mommy's just..." The pain hit and she screamed, dropping the child, falling to her knees as the transformation accelerated. The little girl stood there crying, reaching for her mother, but the woman who'd been there moments ago was already gone. The thing that stood up had her face but not her eyes. It looked at the child once, tilted its head like it was trying to remember something, then spread its wings and lifted off into the sky. The little girl stood there alone, screaming for her mommy, and there was nothing we could do. Nothing anyone could do. We kept running. By the time we reached the plaza near the western wall, the sky had darkened completely. Not with night, with depth. The crack had spread across the entire visible sky, revealing layers beyond layers, space folding into itself. And things were descending now. The winged entities we'd seen earlier were coming down in greater numbers, their forms resolving as they entered our reality. They didn't fly so much as correct their position, adjusting themselves to exist in our space. Each one was slightly different. Some had multiple sets of wings, some had too many joints in their limbs, some had surfaces that looked like stone and bone and metal all at once. But they all had one thing in common. They were looking, not at people, at places, at the city itself, cataloging, measuring, assessing. The plaza was chaos, hundreds of people running, screaming, praying, dying. The horns were loudest here, the sound so intense it felt like it was coming from inside my skull. Daniel grabbed my hand. "There," he pointed. Near the base of the wall, the stone was moving, not crumbling, not shaking, flowing, like the rock itself was liquid, reshaping, rising upward in a column that grew taller and broader with each passing second. A giant was being born from the wall itself. The stone flowed up and up, 20 feet, 30 feet, 40, forming limbs and torso and head with patient precision. The surface remained textured like quarried rock, but I could see the seams where something organic pressed beneath. Its eyes opened, not carved. They just opened, like they'd always been there waiting for the right moment. Deep and dark and endless. The giant didn't move toward anyone. It didn't need to. The space around it curved, reality bending slightly toward its presence. People fell to their knees. Some in worship, some in terror, some because their legs simply stopped working. Another giant emerged further down the wall, then another, then a fourth, each one opening its eyes only after someone looked directly at it, like our observation was what gave them permission to be fully present. Daniel pulled at my arm. "The chamber," his voice was urgent. "We can still—" "Daniel, your nose." Blood again, thick and dark, pouring from both nostrils. He wiped it away absently, but more came immediately. "I'm fine. We just need to—" He stopped. His hand went to his chest. "Miriam," his voice dropped to a whisper. "Something's wrong." I knew before he said it. I'd been watching for the signs ever since the horn started. The blood, the disorientation, the sense that something was calling. But I'd been watching everyone else. Not him. "No," my voice broke. "No, Daniel, you're fine. You're okay. We just need to—" His back arched. Not dramatically, just a slight curve, like he was stretching. But I heard the sound. The wet crack of something moving beneath the skin. "Miriam," his voice was tight with pain. "I can feel it." "No," I sobbed. "Not you. Please, not you." He fell to his knees and I went down with him, holding him, trying to keep him together through sheer force of will. But I could feel it happening beneath his shirt, the skin stretching, the bones beginning to push. "I'm sorry." His voice was barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have—" The pain hit, and he screamed. His shirt tore down the back as the first bone segment pushed through, white and sharp and glistening with blood. I tried to hold him, but he shoved me away, not wanting me to see, not wanting this to be the last thing I remembered about him. But I couldn't look away. The bones extended rapidly, branching and splitting, forming the skeletal structure of wings far too large for his body. The membrane stretched between the segments, translucent and veined, and I could see his blood flowing through it, feeding it, making it real. Daniel's hands clawed at the ground, fingers digging into the stone, and he looked up at me with eyes that were already starting to go empty. "Run," he gasped. "Miriam, run." But I couldn't. I knelt beside him as his body convulsed, as the transformation took him piece by piece. His spine arched further, ribs cracking and reforming to accommodate the new structures. His skin split in a dozen places where the changes demanded more room. Blood poured from the wounds, soaking his clothes, pooling on the ground. He tried to say my name, but the sound that came out wasn't his voice anymore. It was something else, something that knew how to use his mouth but didn't understand language the same way. His wings spread fully 12 feet of bone and membrane and his blood, and he stood. For just a moment, he looked at me, really looked, and I saw him in there, trapped behind eyes that were already going dark, screaming silently as something else took control of everything he was. Then that spark went out. The thing wearing Daniel's face tilted its head, studying me like I was an interesting specimen. It took a step forward. I scrambled backward, sobbing. "Daniel," I whispered. "Baby, please. It's me. It's Miriam." The thing didn't respond. It spread its wings wider, testing them, learning how they worked. Then it looked up at the sky, at the crack, at the vast shapes moving in the depth beyond, and it launched itself upward, wings beating with impossible strength, carrying my husband's body away from me and into the waiting darkness above. I screamed. I screamed until my throat was raw, until I tasted blood, until there was nothing left inside me but grief and rage and the terrible knowledge that I'd killed him. We'd killed him. Our curiosity, our ambition, our need to solve the puzzle. All around me, the city continued to fall apart. More transformations, more giants emerging from the ancient stones, more winged entities descending from the crack. And above it all, something massive was beginning to move. Something so large I could only see parts of it through the opening. A limb here, a surface there, segments of something vast and patient that had been waiting for millennia to be noticed. It was coming through now, because we'd lifted the seventh gate, because we'd removed the final restraint, because Jerusalem, the city that carried the weight of 3 faiths, the city that held more prayers and blood and history than any place on earth, had finally become visible, and the things that watched from above were answering that visibility with presence. I stood there in the plaza, surrounded by screaming and dying and transforming, covered in Daniel's blood, holding the relic that had started all of this. It was cold now, its purpose complete. The delay was over, the blindfold removed, and we were seen. Chapter 5, What Remains. 3 days later, the horn stopped on the second day. Not because whatever was making them decided to show mercy, because they'd finished their work. By then, most of Jerusalem had either transformed, died, or fled. The Israeli military tried to establish a perimeter, but how do you fight something that exists in the sky itself? How do you shoot at entities that only become solid when they choose to? They couldn't, so they pulled back and watched the city die. I survived because I ran, simple as that. When Daniel was taken, something inside me broke, and animal instinct took over. I ran away from the plaza, away from the wall, away from the giants and the winged things and the crack in the sky. I ran until I found a maintenance tunnel that went deep enough that the sound couldn't reach me, and I stayed there for 2 days, drinking condensed water from old pipes and eating nothing. When I finally emerged, Jerusalem was quiet. The transformations had stopped. The horns were silent. The crack in the sky remained, but nothing else was coming through. Not yet. The city looked like a war zone, but there'd been no war, just revelation. Bodies everywhere, most dead from the horns, ears and noses and eyes bled out, brains broken by sound, some transformed, the wings having torn them apart from the inside when the process went wrong. And some, the lucky ones, maybe had simply disappeared, taken up into the sky and whatever waited there. I walked through the empty streets, past abandoned cars and burning buildings and the occasional survivor who looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. Nobody spoke. What was there to say? I made my way back to the western wall because I had nowhere else to go. The giants were still there. 4 of them, each one 40 feet tall, standing motionless at the base of the wall. Their eyes were open, watching, but they didn't move, didn't need to. They'd made their point. Jerusalem was visible now, acknowledged, seen, and that was all they'd wanted. I stood in the empty plaza, looking up at them, and I understood something terrible. They weren't here to destroy us. They were here because we'd finally noticed them. And in noticing them, we'd given them permission to notice us back. The 7th gate hadn't been keeping them out. It had been keeping us hidden. Keeping humanity small and unimportant and beneath the attention of things that existed on scales we couldn't comprehend. But we'd lifted it. And now we were part of the catalog, part of the attention, part of whatever vast inventory was being taken of the world. I pulled the relic from my pocket and looked at it, cold, inert, meaningless now. Just a piece of stone and metal that had once served a purpose. I should have thrown it away, should have buried it or destroyed it or hurled it into the crack in the sky. Instead, I kept it. Because it was the last thing Daniel had touched when he was still Daniel, and I wasn't ready to let that go. I left Jerusalem 3 days after the horn stopped. The military let me through the checkpoints without question. They were too busy trying to contain the information, trying to keep the world from knowing what had happened. But you can't hide something like this. The crack in the sky was visible from space now. Satellites showed it clearly. A thin line running across Jerusalem like a scar, deepening every day. Other cities reported similar phenomena. Rome, Mecca, Varanasi, Kyoto. Every place that carried weight. Every place where humanity had concentrated its faith and blood and history. All of them becoming visible. All of them being noticed. The gates had been everywhere, I realized. Not just in Jerusalem. 7 gates in 7 cities, distributed across the world, each one bearing a portion of the weight. We'd only lifted 1, but 1 was enough. Because the system didn't need all 7 to function, it just needed enough restraint to keep the balance. Remove 1, and the rest would compensate for a while. But eventually, they'd fail too. The weight would shift, and the attention would spread. I live in a small apartment in Tel Aviv now, far from the old city, far from the wall. I don't sleep well. When I close my eyes, I see Daniel's face as he transformed. I see his eyes going dark. I see his wings spreading. Sometimes I dream that he comes back, that he lands on my balcony with those terrible wings and looks at me with something like recognition, that maybe somewhere inside that thing, my husband still exists. But I know better. Daniel's gone, taken by the same curiosity that drove our entire relationship. We wanted to know. We wanted to understand. We wanted to solve the puzzle. And we did. We learned exactly what the 7th gate was holding back. We learned what it meant to be seen. And now, every night, I sit by my window and watch the sky. The crack is spreading, slowly, patiently, like whatever's on the other side knows it has all the time in the world. More cities are reporting giants emerging from their sacred stones. More people are transforming, growing wings, being called home to something vast and incomprehensible. The governments are trying to fight it. They're trying to contain it. They're trying to pretend this is something they can manage. But they can't. Because you can't unnotice something. You can't put attention back once it's been given. The 7th gate is open, and the rest will follow. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when they do, when all 7 gates have fallen, and all the weight has shifted and humanity stands fully visible under a sky that finally acknowledges us. I think we're going to wish we'd stayed hidden. I think we're going to understand why the ancients built the gates in the first place. Not to protect them from what was out there, but to protect what was out there from noticing them. Some things are better left unseen. Some doors are better left closed. Some puzzles are better left unsolved. Daniel and I learned that lesson. We just learned it too late. The relic sits on my desk, cold and inert, a reminder of the worst mistake two people ever made. Sometimes I pick it up and turn it over in my hands, looking for meaning in the depressions that form patterns in the light. But there's no meaning there anymore. Just consequence. Just weight. Just the terrible knowledge that Jerusalem was first. But it won't be last. Folklore note. The concept of 7 seals, 7 gates, or 7 barriers appears across multiple religious and mystical traditions, and their significance in protecting humanity from divine or cosmic attention is a thread that runs deep through ancient texts. In Christian eschatology, the Book of Revelation describes 7 seals that, when opened, bring about the end of the world as we know it. Each seal's breaking releases a new judgment, a new horror, until finally the 7th seal brings silence in heaven, a pause before the final trumpet sound. The seals aren't keeping evil out. They're keeping judgment delayed. In Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah speaks of barriers between the divine and the mundane, separations that exist not to protect God from humanity, but to protect humanity from the overwhelming presence of the divine, to stand in full view of the infinite, unfiltered and unshielded, would annihilate human consciousness. The barriers are mercy. Islamic tradition references 7 heavens, 7 earths, layers of creation that separate the mortal realm from the throne of God. The separation isn't punishment, it's structure. It's the architecture that allows finite beings to exist without being consumed by infinite awareness. Ancient Sumerian and Babylonian texts describe gates to the underworld, thresholds that must remain closed lest the dead and the divine intermingle with the living. The gates weren't locked from the outside. They were latched from within, by those who understood that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The warnings were there, carved in stone, written in texts that have survived translation after translation. Do not lift what bears the city's weight. Do not open what was closed for your protection. Do not seek to be seen. But humanity has always been curious. We've always wanted to know what's on the other side. We've always reached for the forbidden, solved the unsolvable, opened what was meant to stay closed. And sometimes, the reason something was hidden wasn't because it was dangerous to it. It was because it was dangerous to us. Some things notice when you notice them. Some doors open from both sides, and some puzzles were never meant to be solved. Well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terrorific tale from the vault. Oh, poor Daniel. Cry me a fucking river. Thought he could solve the ancient puzzle, lift the sacred relic, and everything would be fine. But some gates were closed for a reason, and some things really don't like being noticed. Now he's flying around with brand new wings and empty eyes, and Miriam gets to live with the knowledge that her curiosity killed her husband, and maybe the whole world. Just how we love it. If this story crawled under your skin the right way, hit that subscribe button. New creature features drop every day at 8 p.m. Central, and trust me, tomorrow's even nastier. Leave a like if you'll be checking the sky tonight for cracks, and drop a comment what sacred place is in your city. What ancient weight are you standing on? What gate have you walked past without noticing? I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Remember, some puzzles were left unsolved for a reason. Some doors were meant to stay closed, and some things were never supposed to notice you were there. Until next time, kiddies, keep your fires burning and your eyes on the sky. This has been your late night creature, feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo, and the heavens are always watching,